Hello, everyone. Today we'll be talking about two romantic poems, The Lamb and The Tyger by William Blake. These poems are part of the Romantic era, which was a time when writers focused more on feelings and the natural world than on cold logic. It's important to realize that these works are meant to be read as a pair. These poems are from a collection called Songs of Innocence and of Experience. This book explores the two opposite sides of the human soul, which are the gentle, peaceful side and the fierce, powerful side. For nearly almost every poem in the Songs of Innocence that shows a world of peace and joy, there is often a corresponding poem in the Songs of Experience that shows the darker reality. For example, both books contain a poem titled The Chimney Sweeper. In the first book, the young boy has a dream of hope and a bright future, which shows the child's ability to remain innocent despite a hard life. However, in the second book, the same poem describes the same boy as a little black thing among the snow, focusing on the cruelty and neglect of society. Blake designed his two collections to work together. We are going to focus on the lamb and the tiger, but many other poems in these books complement each other as well. So, first of all, we should first of all look at the man behind these works, William Blake. He was born in 1757 in London above his parents' shop. His parents were religious dissenters, which means they belonged to a group that didn't follow the rules of the official church. His parents, they let him study on his own. So this saved him from being taught by regular school authorities, which were people he naturally disliked. Even as a young boy, he had unusual visions, such as seeing the face of God or a tree full of angels. Since his family couldn't afford expensive art training, Blake started working as an apprentice to a professional engraver when he was 14. This leads us to his marriage to Catherine Boucher, who was the daughter of a market gardener. Catherine couldn't read when they first met, so Blake taught her how to read and how to help him with his art. She learned how to prepare the metal plates and color the prints by hand, which made her a very important part of his creative process. His younger brother, Robert, also influenced his work. After Robert died, Blake claimed he spoke to his brother's spirit every day. He even said that Robert's spirit visited him and taught him a new technique called illuminated printing. This was a special method where he etched both words and drawings onto copper plates, which allowed him to blend text and art together on a single page. You will actually see this technique on the next slide. This gave him complete creative autonomy. He had total control over everything he made. He also experienced a very dangerous event in his life. In 1803, Blake had a physical fight with a soldier from the Royal Dragoons named John Schofield. The soldier accused him of making seditious remarks, which are words that speak out against the king or the government. This leads us to his arrest for high treason, which was a very serious crime that could be punished by death back then. Thankfully, he was later acquitted. The court found him not guilty. Finally, it's important to realize that Blake was seen as an outsider who was largely unrecognized while he was alive. He lived and died in poverty in London, which means he struggled to have enough money for his daily needs. Many people at the time even thought he was insane because of his strange visions. It wasn't until his final years that he finally attracted a small following of young artists. Today, critics see him as a visionary, radical, and a genius who was far ahead of his time. Now let's start talking about The Lamb. The Lamb comes from a collection called Songs of Innocence, which was first published in 1789. it's important to realize the historical context of this year. This work came out right on the eve of the French Revolution. The French Revolution, which was a time when people in France were fighting to overthrow their government and change their entire society, was just about to begin. Blake was putting out these gentle poems at a time when the world was about to face a lot of violence and chaos. Next, we can look at how Blake actually made this book. He used a technique called illuminated printing. You can see an actual page from the published poem here on the slide. This was a very creative way to work because it blended the text and the visual art together on a single page. Instead of having a printer set the type, Blake etched his own words and drawings into copper plates. This process, which was a very new and different way to produce books, gave him total control over his art. It means that when you look at the poem, you're also supposed to look at the drawings that wrap around the words. This leads us to the ideas that shaped Blake's writing. This poem is a major part of his philosophical framework. It represents the innocence half of what he described as the two contrary states of the human soul. Blake believed that the human soul has two opposite sides, which are innocence and experience. In the state of innocence, people see the world with wonder and trust. They don't see the darker or more complicated parts of life yet. The lamb is the perfect example of this state of mind. It shows us a world that is gentle and safe for everyone. So let's start with Blake's now. Let's look at the first stanza of The Lamb. This part of the poem starts with a catechetical opening. A catechism is a way of teaching people through questions and answers, which is what we see here. The speaker uses a child's question by asking, "Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee?" This simple question sets a tone of wonder and curiosity. Next, we should look at the pastoral ideal that Blake describes in these lines. A pastoral ideal is a way of showing nature as a perfect, peaceful, and happy place. The speaker describes the lamb's physical existence and its gentle environment. He mentions that someone gave thee life and bid thee feed / by the stream and over the mead. It's important to realize that this reflects the idea of divine immanence. Divine immanence is the belief that God is present and active in the physical world around us. Because of this, nature appears to be very good and benevolent and nurturing to the lamb. We can also talk about the language Blake uses to shape the world of innocence. Sensory language is language that describes how things look, feel, or sound. Blake uses words that emphasize softness and light. For example, he says the lamb has clothing of delight and softest clothing woolly bright. This makes the world feel very safe and warm. He also mentions the lamb's tender voice, which is so sweet that it makes all the Velas rejoice. This tells us that even the sounds in this world are filled with pure joy. Now, let's look at the second stanza. You can see the second stanza on the screen here. We can say that the speaker gives a theological answer to his own questions that he asked in the previous part. I mean, the first stanza. Theology means the study of religious beliefs and the nature of God. In the first half of the poem, the child asked, "Who made the lamb?" Now we see the sacred reveal, which is the moment the speaker finally answers that riddle. The child starts by saying, "Little lamb, I'll tell thee," and then gives the answer, "He is called by thy name." Next, we can look at the Christological link Blake creates here. A Christological link is a way of connecting something to the figure of Jesus Christ. The speaker says, "For he calls himself a lamb," which identifies the creator as Jesus. Jesus is often called the Lamb of God in religious texts. The poem describes this creator by saying he is meek and he is mild and he became a little child. You can realize here that Blake is describing a God who isn't scary or strict or, powerful in a loud way. Instead, he's someone who's gentle and chooses to be small and humble, just like a child or a lamb. This leads us to how Blake unites the lamb, the child, and the creator into one single idea. We see this unity when the speaker says, I, a child, and thou, a lamb. We are called by his name. This means that the person speaking, the animal they are talking to, and the God who made them are all part of the same peaceful world. They all share the same name and the same spirit of innocence. Finally, the poem ends with a blessing as a conclusion. The speaker says, Little lamb God bless thee, little lamb God bless thee. This is a benediction, which is a formal religious blessing often used at the end of a church service. By ending this way, Blake makes the poem feel like a prayer that keeps the world of innocence safe. Okay, now to summarize the lamb, we can talk about the main ideas and the impact of this poem. For example, childhood is a major theme here. In this work, the child is seen as a figure of spiritual authority. This means the child has a special kind of wisdom or power because they're so close to God. This way of looking at children, which was very different from how most people thought at the time, shows that being small and simple is actually a strength. Next, we can look at the idea of divine humanity. This is the belief that God isn't just a powerful being far away in the sky. Instead, Blake suggests that God exists within the small, the humble, the small things in our world. It's a very personal way of looking at faith because it means you can find the divine in a little animal or a young person. This leads us to what's known as the poem's contrary legacy. Blake later wrote a famous poem called The Tyger, which was meant to be the opposite of The Lamb. By pairing these two poems together, he forces a lot of theological tension. Theological tension is the feeling of conflict or confusion you get when you try to understand how the same creator could make both a gentle, soft lamb and a scary, powerful tiger. Blake wanted us to think about how both these things can exist in the world at the same time. Finally, we should look at the canonical state of this work. When something is called canonical, it means that it's considered one of the most important and standard pieces of literature for everyone to study. This poem is a cornerstone of Romanticism. Romanticism was an artistic movement that focused on topics like deep feelings, the imagination, and the beauty of nature. Through this poem, Blake was challenging Enlightenment rationalism. Enlightenment rationalism was a way of thinking where people believed that everything in the world could be explained by logic, math, and science alone. So Blake's poem tries to remind the reader that there are parts of the human experience that science can't always explain. Now we will look at Blake's second poem, The Tyger, which comes from the collection titled Songs of Experience. It was published in 1794. So while his earlier poems, for example, The Lamb, were written just before the French Revolution began, this work was written right in the middle of a very violent period known as the Reign of Terror. This was a time when the revolution in France had turned extremely bloody. At the same time, England was going through the Industrial Revolution, which Blake often described as a world of dark satanic mills.
These were factories that were destroying both the land and the nature and the spirits of the people who worked in them. This leads us to how the tiger serves as a direct counter perspective to the lamb. Blake wanted to show the experience side of the human soul, which is darker and more complicated than the innocence side we saw in the lamb. It's important to realize that this poem isn't just about a scary animal. It's a theological inquiry, which is a way of saying it's an investigation into the nature of God. While the lamb asked how God, as a gentle creator, could make a gentle creature, the tiger asks how that same creator could make something so dangerous and fierce. Uh, the poem forces us to face a lot of theological tension. For example, why there is both beauty and violence in the world. Also, we should look at the aesthetic concept of the sublime, which is a major theme in this poem. The word aesthetic just refers to the study of beauty and how we feel when we look at art or nature. In Blake's time, the sublime was a way of describing a type of beauty that is so vast and powerful that it actually feels dangerous and scary. It is beauty that borders on horror. When you look at a tiger, you see something that is beautiful and perfect, but it's also something that could easily kill you. This leads us to the main question of the poem. What kind of creator would design such a fearful symmetry? Blake uses the tiger to represent a force that is beyond human control or simple logic. Finally, it is important to realize that this poem was part of Blake's challenge to Enlightenment rationalism. As I mentioned before, this was a way of thinking where people believed everything could be explained with simple math and logic. By writing about the tiger, Blake was showing that there are powerful, scary, and mysterious parts of existence that logic just can't explain.
Next, we should look at the opening lines of the poem, which begin with the famous words, Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. You can see or hear the specific rhythm Blake uses here, which is called trochaic tetrameter. This is a pattern of speech where a strong, stressed beat is followed by a weaker one. This creates a rhythm, a rhythmic pulse throughout the stanza. It sounds like a heavy heart beating or a blacksmith's hammer hitting a piece of metal. This intense sound is very different from the gentle, quiet feeling of the lamb, and it tells us immediately that we are in a much more powerful and dangerous world. This leads us to the idea of dualism, which is the contrast between two very different or opposite things. We see this in the way Blake describes the tiger as burning bright while it's in the forests of the night. The tiger represents a violent kind of energy and fire. This is placed against the forests of the night, which represent a world of chaos and a lack of knowledge. By putting these two things together, Blake shows us a creature that shines with its own light. I mean, the tiger, it shines with his own light, even in a place that's dark and confusing. It's important to realize that this reflects the experience side of the soul, where life is no longer simple or easy to understand. Next, we should look at the figure of the architect of the tiger, I mean. The speaker asks, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Here, the poem, I think, shifts its focus. It moves away from just looking at the animal and starts looking at the scary, the terrifying power of the creator who made it. This is a theological question about God. The speaker isn't just asking about the tiger anymore. He's asking what kind of being would have the strength and the will to design such a dangerous creature. Finally, we can talk here about symmetry, the concept of symmetry
the speaker mentions the tiger's fearful symmetry. Symmetry is a word for a kind of divine or mathematical order where everything is perfectly balanced and matched. It's important to realize that Blake sees this perfect order even within a creature that's predatory and violent. Even though the tiger is scary, it's not a mistake. It's perfectly designed. It follows a specific plan. This creates a lot of religious anxiety, which is the difficult feeling we get when we try to understand why a good creator would make something so fierce. It forces the reader to think that both the soft lamb and the violent tiger are part of the same grand design. Next, we should look at the deeper process of how the tiger was made. The speaker asks, "In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire?" These lines actually refer to ancient stories about bold ambition. For instance, the mention of wings and seizing fire brings to mind the myths of Icarus and Prometheus. As you know from your mythology classes, Icarus was a boy who tried to fly too high with wings made of wax, and Prometheus was the one who stole fire from the gods. By using these images, Blake is talking about the bravery of creation, which is a way of saying it takes a lot of nerve and courage to make something as powerful as a tiger. This leads us to the industrial metaphor found in the poem. In these lines, God isn't shown as a gentle shepherd like we saw in The Lamb. Instead, he is depicted as a muscular blacksmith working with heavy metal. The speaker asks, "What the hammer? What the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil?" Remember, as I have told you, Blake lived during the Industrial Revolution, which was a time when factories and machines were changing the world. He also spent his life working as a professional engraver, which was a job that required a lot of hard physical labor with metal plates. Because of this background, he shows the creator using tools to forge the tiger's brain in a hot furnace. Next, we can look at the violence of creation. The poem asks, "And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart?" The sinews are the strong cords in the body that connect muscles to bones. The word twist here suggests that creating life is an act of great and even painful effort, hard physical work. This makes the tiger's heart feel like it was made through a struggle of raw power rather than being something soft and easy. Finally, this leads us to the escalating dread, the horror in the stanza. The speaker asks, "And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet?" He later mentions a dread grasp that must clasp the tiger's deadly terrors. Dread is a feeling of deep fear or awe. By repeating the word dread, Blake is showing the overwhelming nature of the tiger's physical presence. This repetition forces the reader to feel the same fear that the speaker feels as he looks at the creature. It shows that the tiger is so powerful that it's scary to even think about the hands or feet that brought it to life. Okay, so now this is the last part of the poem. This part of the poem deals with a cosmic conflict. Blake writes, "When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears." These lines refer to a very famous story about a war in heaven, which is an idea that was influenced by the poet John Milton. In this story, rebel angels fought against God and were eventually defeated. When the stars throw down their spears, it's like soldiers giving up their weapons after a long battle. The tears suggest that even the heavens were sad about the violence and the change that was happening. Next, we should look at the theological pivot of the poem. By pivot, I mean the turning point where the most important question is asked. The speaker asks, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? This is the central crisis, the problem of the entire work. Here, the speaker is wondering if the creator, I mean, God was actually happy with what he had made. He's asking if the same God who made the soft and gentle lamb could also be the one who made the sharp and dangerous tiger. This leads us to what we can call the problem of evil. This is the big question of how a kind and loving creator could also make things that are violent and predatory. Blake doesn't give us a simple answer. Instead, he wants us to think about whether the source of gentle innocence and scary violence is one and the same. It's a very difficult thought to process, which is why the poem feels so intense and full of mystery. Finally, we should look at how the poem ends by moving from could to dare. The last stanza repeats the first one almost exactly, but with one very important change. In the beginning, the speaker asked, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? At the end, he asks, who would dare to do it? You know that could is just about having the power or the skill to do something. However, dare is about having the audacity, which is a word for extreme boldness or courage. This change shows that making the tiger wasn't just a display, a show of strength. It was a terrifying choice to bring something dangerous into existence.
Okay, now we finished the stanzas of the poem. We can discuss the general themes of the poem. So Blake uses the tiger to challenge the Enlightenment view of God. During the 18th century, many thinkers believed in a benevolent, a good clockmaker God. A benevolent clockmaker is someone who builds the world like a perfect logical machine and then just lets it run on its own. Blake didn't think this simple, happy view of a creator was enough to explain the world. He shows us a God who is capable of making something fierce and dangerous. The tiger, which is a creature of sharp teeth and claws, forces us to see a more scary side of God. This leads us to the idea of the industrial sublime. This poem reflects the anxieties of the 18th century during the start of the Industrial Revolution. Blake often spoke about dark satanic mills, which were the new smoky factories that he felt were destroying nature and the human spirit. In the poem, the tiger isn't born in a field, in nature, like the lamb. Instead, it's forged with a hammer, a furnace, and an anvil. This creates a sense of the industrial sublime, which means a type of beauty that is so massive and powerful it actually makes you feel afraid. Blake uses these mechanical images to show how the world was becoming a place of cold, hard metal and overwhelming power. The tiger also represents experience. You see, in Blake's work, experience isn't just a bad thing, it represents the fierce vitality, the life force that a person needs to survive in a broken and complicated world. So, while the lamb represents a world of peace and trust, the tiger represents the raw energy that exists in nature. The tiger is a symbol of powerful energy. So the tiger shows us that life can be both beautiful and very violent at the same time. Next, finally, we can talk about the poem's literary position. This means that the tiger
is one of the most famous and studied poems in history romantic period literature, because the poem asks so many deep questions without giving simple answers. It's been interpreted in many different ways over the years. I mean, for example, some critics see it as a poem about the French Revolution. Some see it as a poem about the act of creating art. It's a work that people keep coming back to because it captures the mystery of our existence, which is why it remains so popular today.
Okay, so this was my discussion of The Lamb and the Tiger by William Blake. You must remember that these two poems are meant to be viewed together as a single big idea. You can't fully understand one without looking at the other. Finally, next, we should look at why these poems are still so famous today. It's because these poems, The Lamb and the Tiger, challenge the ideas of Enlightenment rationalism, which was a way of thinking that tried to explain the whole world using only math and logic. Blake tries to tell us that there are mysteries in life that science can't always solve by asking, did he who made the lamb make thee? Okay, I hope this presentation has helped you see the connections between these two iconic works. Thank you for your time.